JP Morosi. And John, listen, we always joke around these parts that you are our favorite international renaissance man of baseball. And the fact is, this is a global pandemic that is touching the entire world. And I'm wondering, if you look at Major League Baseball's colleagues abroad, how have their games, their seasons been impacted?
Well, Stephen, the optimism right now in Japan is that they may be able to start their season within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Of course, their spring training also has been disrupted, as has been the case in South Korea as well. And for perspective on Japan, I actually spoke this week with Frank Herman, a former pitcher for both the Indians and the Phillies here in the States. He's from the States. He's now entering his 4th season in NPB in Japan. And Frank told me that around the time he arrived in Japan for spring training in late January, he sensed, just by going about his everyday life in Japan and getting ready for the season, that Japan at that point in time with the novel coronavirus was roughly where we are right now. And so when you start to forward date that progression, Frank saying that he hopes, and certainly the people that are in charge of the league in Japan hope to begin their play in the first part of April, maybe latter part of April, that it's almost for him, in his perspective, a 10-week life cycle from when he arrived until when regular season games could begin. So 10 weeks from roughly now would be the latter part of May, which speaks to what Joel Sherman mentioned earlier, where maybe it's going to be later than what the initial projection was of those first couple weeks being postponed, as has been the case for MLB. And Frank did make sure to say that around him that there are aspects of life that now that they've been dealing with it in Japan for this amount of time, more than basically a month and a half, that certainly things have changed, that daily rituals are different than what he has remembered from the past several years. Some strains of normalcy are returning, but the key thing is that Frank told me that basically they've gotten to this point where they're still probably a few weeks away from having games by doing from what he can tell, everything the right way and heeding all the guidance that's out there. So I think what my extrapolation would be there is that if we want to have a chance to have baseball by May, we have got to do as a society and as citizens everything the right way.
John, another country that the entire world is monitoring is one that's near and dear to your heart, and that's Italy. What lessons can be learned, to your point, from our friends there?
Well, Stephen, Italy, unfortunately, has had the greatest number of cases outside of China of any country in the world right now, and they really have been suffering terribly the last several weeks with the country basically on lockdown. And Mike Piazza, the great Hall of Famer, actually now currently the manager of the Italian national baseball team, he lives in Italy, but it recently traveled back to Florida, and he talked to Kevin Kernan of the New York Post and said this, quote, "I just talked to a close friend over there. And what happened is that when they shut down the schools initially at the end of February, the Italians made a big mistake. They were all going to the piazza and having lunch and drinks, and that was a big mistake because people had the virus and did not know it and were passing it on and made the situation a lot worse. And now, obviously, the country is in a full lockdown. The biggest fear is the fear of the unknown, the fear of the darkness." End quote. Stephen, it's been a while for Italy to now adjust and try to find what their new normal is going to be, and their hope to find a way to stop what has been a surge on their hospitals. And really, that's what this is all about. If you've seen on Twitter, hashtag flatten the curve, it's a matter of limiting and social distancing, as we've heard about. And all of that drives at not having a whole huge number of sick people arriving to the hospitals and compromising the care they give to everybody, not just those who are affected with the coronavirus, but certainly other cases as well. If you're an oncology patient, a heart disease patient, you still need to get your care as well. So really, it's about helping our incredible doctors and nurses do the best job that they can. And so what Mike Piazza is telling us here by that quote to Kevin Kernan is, listen, the message that we're hearing from the experts, stay away, stay home unless it's absolutely necessary. That advice that we're hearing from a lot of experts, Mike Piazza is echoing that from the experience that he has had talking to his friends back in Italy.
Yeah, JP, I think it just comes down to simply having respect for the seriousness and the significance of the virus as a whole. Bringing it back to the States and Major League Baseball, as you survey people from around the league, what impressions are you getting about the steps that have been made thus far?
Well, Stephen, I was speaking with an agent today, just who has a number of major league clients, and his point to me was that there really is, as Joel has said before, no clear answer to give the players as to what they should do. Every answer is unique to their own family circumstances, of course. But again, he has counseled his players to be ready that we may not be able to play until sometime in May. That is sort of the collected wisdom that you seem to sense from players, that they are bracing for what could be a long layoff and thinking, where is the best place for me to go, for my family to go in the interim. And I think that historically, and Joel's made this point as well, you think about ways where the schedule could be framed in different numbers of games, what happens to the All-Star game, the playoffs. I am heartened, Stephen, in this moment that by a couple things. Number one, that the sports leagues have broadly taken such leadership and really, I think, brought home the severity of this crisis to so many Americans with the suspension of the NBA season and other moves that have been made subsequent to that. But also that there's been a great collaboration between MLB and the union about what the best way forward is going to be. And if that means the playoffs must look a different way, a neutral site championship, a World Series potentially, all of those things I think should be discussed and are being discussed, because simply we don't know if there will be a seasonality to the situation where it possibly could get better in the summer and then perhaps become an issue again in the fall. We simply do not know enough information right now. And I would say finally, Stephen, there's a great precedent in our country for forging ahead through difficult times through sports. And I think when the time is right, sports will have certainly a role to play. There have also been times in the past, think of the 1919 Stanley Cup final, that was not completed at all because of the flu pandemic that year. So historically, we've been able to forge ahead as a country and as a sports world. But the way to get there now, if you want to be able to enjoy our treasured sports and certainly baseball this summertime, the best thing we can do now is be great citizens and think about each other, stay home when possible, and keep the social distancing. And we hope that we'll have those beautiful words of opening day here at some point in time in the weeks and months to come.